Hello everyone, I'm Leonard French, your favorite copyright attorney, back, as I said I would be. Oh, right at 9:30, look at that, it's like perfectly on the dot. It is such a nice day. The rain has stopped, and I am headed down to the Maryland Renaissance Fair. I think we're actually passing into Maryland soon. We may notice the roads get a little worse. That's only because Delaware has a crap ton of corporate investment because they make their corporate taxes favorable and people start their corporations in Delaware, all from all over the country and all over the world. Hello everyone, hello Cerulean, hello the guy who has hands. I appreciate you all, welcome. I'm Leonard French, your favorite copyright attorney. Today's a very informal show. Yes, someone else is driving, my friend Michael, who you can sort of see over there. I'm not going to distract him any further from driving because he should not be distracted from driving. I'm sorry for any road noise or vibrations, or if we get pulled over.
Watch out,
or whatever,
vehicle stopped on shoulder ahead.
or if it reminds us that there's a vehicle stopped on the shoulder ahead. It's just it's a holiday weekend here. We're having a good time going down to the Maryland Renaissance Fair to see my friend Michael's sister dance in her ballet company at the fair. All dressed up as a Renaissance person?
Yeah, they're
okay. Yeah, all dressed up in full garb and everything. If you really want, you could probably get me to try and live stream record it for you. That nurse is my heroine. Yes, let's talk about the nurse. So sometime last week, was it Thursday? I can't remember if it was Thursday or Friday. There was an incident. I forget where. It was at a hospital, and a police officer was trying to get a blood draw from a patient. And then there was a video of the nurse getting arrested. The nurse stopped the officer from taking the blood from the patient, and the nurse got arrested. Case closed. Don't get in the way of an officer, right? No, that is not the way things work. First, there's a whole 20-minute video on it. I have to admit I did not watch the 20-minute video. I watched the 3-minute video, which was basically towards the end of the thing when she actually gets arrested. There are Fourth Amendment protections. We have a Constitution in the United States, and the Constitution protects your rights. And you have to know what those rights are. They're not unlimited rights. The Fourth Amendment to the Constitution, the Fourth Amendment
in 5.6
Bill
miles.
of Rights.
Exit to exit 62, I-895 South,
sorry.
Baltimore Harbor Tunnel Thruway, to Annapolis.
Okay, gonna have to put up with that. We need our directions. The Fourth Amendment protects your right to be free from unwarranted searches and seizures or intrusive searches and seizures by the government. So what happens is the government, if the officer wants something, he can either get a warrant or he has to prove that there will be some kind of circumstances that are legally recognized, called exigent circumstances, and these circumstances are legally recognized as the only circumstances under which an officer may violate the Fourth Amendment and not get a warrant. So what had really happened here with the nurse and the officer was that the nurse was treating a patient, and the patient was actually the victim of the car accident. The officer had been pursuing, or officers, I don't remember if it was the same officer, but an officer had been pursuing a second vehicle. That second vehicle, a third party, had run into the victim that was the subject of the nurse's video, of the officer and the nurse's controversy was over the patient, and the patient was the victim of the accident. He was a truck driver, I believe, and I believe it was a male, and he was unconscious. The collision...
Watch out, vehicle stopped on shoulder ahead.
...was so severe that I believe the perpetrator or the car that was being pursued had caused the accident and had I think died in the accident, but, and I gotta stop saying accident, it's a motor vehicle collision is what we call them today. But the truck driver was the victim of this collision and was being brought in for treatment at the hospital. And for some, I have no idea what the reason really was, the officer wanted to draw the truck driver's blood. Now, why would you draw someone's blood after a motor vehicle collision? There's really only one reason, and that's to check for blood alcohol level of drugs and alcohol. Check for level of intoxication. Well, to do that, there are certain circumstances that you're allowed to do that. One of the exigent circumstances under the law is as part of a lawful arrest, incident to lawful arrest. You are allowed to search incident to a lawful arrest. So if you get pulled over on the side, and you pulled over on the side of the road for a speeding violation or something like that, and the officer finds a warrant, or the officer finds an illegal gun in your car, or some other reason, some other probable cause, then the officer can not only arrest you, but also conduct some level of search. I'm not a criminal defense attorney. I am only recalling what I learned in criminal procedure and criminal law in law school.
Exit right to exit 62, I-895 South, Baltimore Harbor Tunnel Thruway to Annapolis.
But the point is that the officer who's trying to get this blood needs to have some kind of probable cause or a warrant. So why couldn't the officer just go get a warrant? Well, to get a warrant, you have to convince a judge that you have probable cause. So that's not a way around the probable cause necessity. What would normally happen if the nurse hadn't put up a fight is the officer would just take the blood, run the blood sample, the government would get the results back, and then some defense attorney someplace would have to make an argument that whatever was found in the blood
right to
can't
exit
be
62, I-895 South, Baltimore Harbor Tunnel Thruway to Annapolis.
There we go. That'll be much better. I'll keep it up a little bit so you can still hear it.
Continue straight for 9 minutes to exit 6, 97 South,
6.
Maryland 2 South, Annapolis, Glen Burnie.
So that's not what happened in this case. Why? Because we have a diligent nurse. I'm gonna actually try to just turn it off. It's just too annoying.
That's fine.
We'll just have to follow the signs or turn yours on or something. Where you got yours?
Yeah.
You could stick yours in this thing.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Wow, that just got real. So the officer didn't get a chance to draw the blood, and this was an officer that was trained as a phlebotomist. So the officer had the ability, the medical knowledge as to how to draw the blood. So that even adds an element to it. Like, it was actually the nurse was really preventing him from drawing the blood. He had all of the ability to. He just needed access to the patient, and the patient was now in the custody of the hospital. And so now the officer is at the hospital trying to get access to the patient to draw the blood. So the nurse sticks up for the patient and says, well, wait a second, very calmly, as far as the video I saw, well, wait a second, you don't have a warrant, and you didn't tell me that the man was under arrest, and you don't have his consent, and the man is unconscious, and he can't give his consent. So the nurse rightly sticks up for the patient and says, I'm so sorry, I can't allow you to draw the patient's blood. And so the officer becomes argumentative and says that he wants to draw the patient's blood, that his lieutenant has ordered him to get the blood, and that she has to step aside and let him do that. So she calls her supervisor, and her supervisor confirms that hospital policy is based on the law, that these policies have been vetted with the police departments, and that the police departments have approved that these policies are within the police department's view of the law as well. So she explains that to him, and that there are only 3 things here. Nate, thank you for the $10. Appreciate that. She explains this to the officer, and at some point the officer just has enough and he grabs the nurse, I think it's like around the waist, and he just drags her out of the hospital by force. And she's not fighting him with all of the might a person would fight with if they maybe had their life threatened, but she's definitely freaked the fuck out and scared to hell, and is screaming and yelling a little bit. This seems to be something she's never experienced before. I wonder if maybe she's also experienced some trauma during that moment. And then he handcuffs her and puts her in the car and takes her away. At some point then thereafter, she was released. There's no charges against the nurse. And now the state attorney and the city mayor have condemned the act, not her act, but the officer's act, and have called for an investigation into the officer and the, actually not only one officer, but the other officer that was there as well, who seems to just be standing by and just going with it. And I believe the officers have been placed on administrative leave. Okay, I don't know how this is going to work. I'm going to a tunnel. So I'll be back in a second. Stay with me. Now, it seems like they might actually have service in the tunnel for now. Okay, that's weird. So what are the consequences here? Well, the officer's been placed on administrative leave, and there will be some kind of investigation. And I fully expect that the officer will be found to have violated the rights of the nurse. Whether or not the hospital or the nurse have a claim against the officer, I think the nurse does. I think the nurse would have some kind of either claim against the officer personally or against the department. If the nurse can prove that the department failed to train the officer properly, then she'll have a claim against the department. If the nurse can prove that the officer violated his knowledge of training and policy and procedure, then she can actually reach him personally and go after, yeah, the signal does seem better in the tunnel, doesn't it? And go after him personally, and I don't know if that means much, but officers do make a decent amount of money, they do have decent pensions and things like that, so she could reach him civilly. As far as charges against the officer, yeah, that's a big funny, huh? The officer could be charged. I might actually expect a district attorney, depending upon the political climate, might charge the officer with something, or might have a grand jury indict the officer with something, or if the grand jury decides to indict. And either we'll see the grand jury doesn't indict, or the actual trial jury will probably acquit the officer of any wrongdoing, because that seems to be what they typically do. This could be the first time where they do find the officer guilty and liable and all that. Well, guilty, yes. Liable, yes. Guilty, I'm not sure. That's the one I'm not sure about. If they do find the officer guilty, liable's for money, guilty is for criminal charges. If they find him guilty of criminal charges, I'll be pleasantly surprised. But, so, yes, it was a false arrest. It was probably false arrest, false imprisonment, some kind of assault, and battery. Common law battery. I don't know if anybody uses that anymore. And so there's definitely criminal charges that can be brought. But what we have in this country is not compulsory. We have prosecutorial discretion. And so prosecutorial discretion would mean that the DA or charging body can decide for themselves whether any charges are brought at all and what level of severity those charges should be brought at. And this also means that the DA could choose to bring charges that won't stick or bring the worst charges possible. It could really mean anything whatsoever in between there. Hopefully a prosecutor will make the minimum appropriate charges so that the judge and the jury can find the officer guilty of at least a little something, and it can send a deterrent message to the law enforcement community, who I don't think needs that much of a deterrent message. There are just some people in the law enforcement community. Let me back up for a second and state my opinion here. Law enforcement in general is a good thing, and the officers and troopers and sergeants and law enforcement staff that run the various law enforcement agencies of this company in general do a very good job. One of the reasons you see problems in pockets from time to time is because... I'll turn this down then.
No. I'm just going to put this in so that way it doesn't affect the stream.
One of the reasons you see problems from time to time is that every little department is its own little fiefdom and can have its own policies and procedures until they go outside the bounds of something, and then even until someone does something about it. A defendant has to sue them or win a big case in court or something before a department will say, oh, wait a second, we shouldn't have that policy in place. Sometimes they literally find another tunnel. Sometimes law enforcement will literally enact a law, including the legislature, including Congress, which is not law enforcement. But sometimes a law will be put in place or a policy put in place that isn't sustainable, but just has the desired effect. For example, my little town of Bethlehem. Oh, little town of Bethlehem. My little town of Bethlehem enacted a no cell phones law in your car. Well, Pennsylvania's state law was that you are allowed to have your cell phone and you are allowed to use it and you are allowed to text and drive, and if you are really guilty of an offense, then it's some kind of careless driving or something. But the city of Bethlehem still enacted a law, no texting and driving. And they did pull people over for a little bit, but lawyers quickly figured out that this was not a valid law and you could not enforce this law. So the Bethlehem still has signs and a law that say no cell phones while driving. They just don't pull anybody over for it and don't ticket anybody for it. Or at least they aren't supposed to be, because it's not a real law. And that's a whole other scenario. There is such a thing as federal preemption, and that means certain federal laws preempt state laws, or even the ability of states to make certain laws. Usually in interstate commerce is where you see that, and this is otherwise known as the Dormant Commerce Clause. But, so this officer, this officer I don't think was acting in the most compassionate and productive way possible. The nurse was not being belligerent. The nurse was not being difficult. He said the nurse was obstructing. Could the nurse have been obstructing justice? Well, maybe. If the officer had a warrant, or if the officer had some kind of probable cause, and he could articulate this probable cause to the nurse, and the nurse then said, I'm not giving you access to this patient, then maybe we'd have a situation where she was obstructing justice and could be under arrest for obstruction of justice. Sometimes they arrest you for obstruction of justice just to get you out of the way so they can do their thing they want to do, conduct the search, illegal or not, and then later on deal with the obstruction of justice charge later. And yes, I too am interested in the video on demand on this one to see what it's going to look like, as I've never done a live stream from my phone before. Especially not on the road. I would normally do this from a stable location that I know and have tested everything works and all that. So we're just winging it this morning. So did the... Yeah, Black Leaf, let's meet up at the Ren Fair. You have my Discord information. Just hit me up on Discord. So she wasn't obstructing. The officer said something about she was in the way of preventing him from helping the trucker. Well, what help was he gonna be? You get a lot from officers that say that they only want to help you when they are asking you questions and asking you to give up your rights, basically. And it's hard to know when you should help them and when not to. And I can't even summarize it here in a 5-minute live stream, or even a 30-second summary of when you should and shouldn't talk to officers. It can really help you sometime to get out of a situation by talking to the officers. But how are you going to know when? How are you going to know when to talk to the officer and what to say? I'll give you a very good example of a recent client. The person was pulled over for making an illegal turn. Person was drowsy, said, "Sorry, officer, I didn't see the sign. I'm looking for a hotel. I'm tired." "Oh, well, you know, you take any drugs? Do you haven't had any alcohol?" He said, no alcohol, no drugs. I just take Benadryl because I get headaches or whatever. And the officer charged him with DUI for taking Benadryl. So, wow, right? Poor quality? What are you talking about? Yeah, I'm sorry about any poor quality, guys. I got 4 bars over here. So then the officer said he was helping the truck driver. Well, there's really no help that the officer can be. If the officer is trying to help the truck driver, the officer doesn't need to draw their blood at all. The only argument I could hear is if there was an accusation against the truck driver and they wanted to clear the truck driver. But if there was an accusation, then there would be probable cause for that accusation, and there wasn't. The perpetrator hit the truck driver. The truck driver was just a victim of the accident, the collision. So what I think happened was the officer doesn't like his authority being challenged. And the officer had thought that he had the authority to do what he did because his supervisor, his lieutenant, really wanted the blood draw. But instead of the two of them thinking through everything, or this third officer that was on the scene here, the officer in question blew his lid and just grabbed the nurse and yanked her out of there. Now, here's the problem I have with that. It wasn't the nurse that was really being the obstructor. It was the hospital policy. It was the hospital policy that had been worked out with the departments. So the nurse is just a lowly employee to me. And I don't mean that the nurse is lowly in any way. I just mean that on the chain of command, in the legal realm of the hospital and the law and all that, she's not the one making those decisions. She's just the one trying to advocate for the patient, both medically and legally. Also, you know, the patient might get upset at the hospital later if the patient finds out that the hospital let them draw his blood and he did not consent. So they're also protecting their legal rights by not allowing the blood draw there too. So the officer then has to attack the nurse, has to arrest the nurse. Why didn't the officer attack or arrest the nurse's supervisor who was telling the nurse not to allow the blood draw? Why didn't the officer arrest the hospital CEO who was the head honcho of the organization? Why didn't the officer arrest the chief legal officer or legal counsel for the hospital who wrote the policy? Because that's not who was easy and who was in front of him. Who was easy and in front of him was the nurse. When all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, and the only way that officer could win in that moment was to grab the nurse and arrest her and make an example and a big deal out of it. And that, honestly, that makes the officer a coward. I think the officer is a big fucking coward and needs to be taken off of officer duties and made a fucking mall cop, because that is not the kind of response we want. Could you imagine what this officer would be like in an actual pressure situation if this is what he does when a nurse politely refuses him? This officer could shoot people. This officer could shoot innocent people. This officer could make decisions that... Well, we saw one last week, didn't we? We saw a detective get out of his car and pull a Glock, plain clothes, on a biker because he said the biker was going 100 miles an hour and driving recklessly. Right in the middle of traffic, this sergeant, this detective gets out of his car and points a Glock, like right here, like he's pointing it like this, like he's hiding it. He's pointing it at the motorcycle driver, because the driver was allegedly driving recklessly. Well, I'm going to go one step further and say that with your finger on the trigger and a gun pointed at somebody, that now you're recklessly endangering a motorcyclist who was not doing anything, was not presenting a threat of a level necessary for that response, where that response was necessary. Walk around the guy's bike and get his license plate, take a picture of him, then contact your patrol officers and charge him with the offense. What the hell? There's nothing wrong with that. I've seen that happen. I've been a witness in things like that, road rage incidents and stuff like that. I drive with a dash cam, and occasionally when something happens, I report it. And you go to court, and you don't get angry and try to run people off the road or pull guns or stuff, even if you are stay in your lane, buddy. Even if you are a gun-wielding officer with all the authorization in the world to shoot under reasonable circumstances. So this is just crazy that this is what officers think is okay to do. And honestly, I think this was happening even more than this, but we just see it now that the internet has been so prevalent in the last 20-some years. What'd you have? The worst thought, Captain Yosho. What do you think? I don't know that it's a kidnapping. Usually kidnapping requires more. And I don't think that a jury would actually arrest the guy for, find the guy guilty of kidnapping. But the chat stream delay is very low today. Yeah, I don't know. This is the first time I've done a from the phone live stream direct. So I'm hoping that I'm loud enough. I'm hoping that I sound okay enough, that the road noise is good, and the fact that I have it strapped to the mirror, the vanity mirror here, isn't like transmitting extra road noise. That sounds fine. Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate you all. Very much so. Thank you very much. So that's really all I had to present today, and we're only a few minutes away, so I will take questions now. It's kind of hard for them. They do scroll past pretty quick, so I'm going to read them as best I can and try to get a couple questions. They won't be questions from the old part of the stream. Clueless question, but is unlawful arrest a viable crime to be punished for? The actual unlawful arrest is not a crime, it's the other things that are a result of it. Since you didn't lawfully arrest someone, you were just grabbing them. You were just grabbing them and taking them. So now you've grabbed and taken a person. What do we call that? We call that assault or kidnapping. I don't think this one's going to be kidnapping, so it's probably going to be assault, if anything. Why are gringo cops crazy? There's a little bit of a culture thing. We're very headstrong and stubborn in the United States, including me. I wouldn't make a great cop because I'd probably be just as stubborn and headstrong, but at least I would know the law and I'd be stubborn and headstrong only when necessary, which is probably when you should be. But still, you get cops who get a little bit headstrong and cocksure, and then they go off and they go off. The cocksure goes off, but chick. And he does something like this. The one with the motorcycle shootings. Also, they're in somewhat of a pressure situation. They think they have to perform and look good for the officer community and the boys in blue and their supervisors, and they don't want people to be questioning their authority. If you go over to Europe, it's completely different. I've seen people yelling at officers and officers standing there chewing gum or just swinging their club or whatever and just being like, yeah, whatever. Around here, if you yelled at an officer, you'd probably get arrested for it, or at least they would consider arresting you for it because that's some kind of offense to an officer. If he was ordered to take the blood, that doesn't make it any less of an unlawful arrest, even if he was ordered by his supervisor. If anything, that makes it easier for him to blame his department for the unlawful arrest, but that'll be something that comes up in court. There should be a full investigation and the proper party should be dealt with. Somebody should be getting charged with something. I would like it if we stopped in this country. I'd like it if we stopped letting people off the hook just because they're one step removed in the chain of command, just because it was somebody's lieutenant that made the order and it was the lowly officer that had to arrest her. If he comes back and says, look, I knew it was an unlawful arrest, I told my lieutenant it was an unlawful arrest, but he said go ahead and arrest her anyway, I gotta do what my lieutenant says, then that's fine in some sense. Like, I still think he grabbed her a little bit too violently. Like, he could have arrested her in a different way, but whatever, he could make that argument in court. But then the lieutenant doesn't get charged as the officer would have. And I think that's wrong, because if the reverse were true, if I ordered someone to hurt an officer, I could get charged with that offense. If I told someone, go kill an officer, go hit an officer, go attack an officer, whatever, and I was wrong, and that person said, but Leonard French told me to do it, I could get charged with the whole violation, even the stuff that the other person did but because I conspired with them to do it. So why shouldn't it work the other direction? Why shouldn't the officer's lieutenant be charged with something if he was the one giving the orders? So, yeah. Oh, I can go back up here. Okay, let's try to do this. What are the state laws? What state laws are there to be seen to stop a cop from this? It's not so much a state law needs to be made. The state laws can be made, but the legislature is in a difficult position. They want to support their officers. I support officers. I support law enforcement. I'm disappointed in law enforcement generally in my area. At least I'm disappointed personally. I'm not disappointed in the job they're doing overall, but I'm disappointed in my officers that I have called for help because they have not helped me the way I had hoped they would. But that does not mean that they're all bad officers. It doesn't mean they're even majority bad officers, and it's really not proper for us to forget about the thousands and thousands and thousands of wonderful law enforcement personnel who put their lives on the line every day. Real quick, Tom, why can't you get a blood draw from someone who crashed? You can. You would be correct in that scenario. That was not the scenario. The crash was into the victim that they were looking to get the blood draw from. The blood draw was not from a DUI perpetrator. The blood draw was from the victim of the perpetrator. Now, I don't know how much more signal I'm going to have here. Well, those are some pretty buildings. I don't even know where I am, but those are some pretty buildings. I don't even know if you can see. No, you can't even see that. I'm sorry. That sucks. Sucks for you.
Crownsville Hospital Center.
Yeah, State of Maryland, Crownsville Hospital. Behavioral. Oh, this is a whole behavioral health center. We're going past a loony bin. Maybe I should be there. Let's just hang a right. I need to stop and see home. So, I forget what I was saying, but you can't get the blood draw because you didn't have probable cause in the form of either a DUI, an accusation of DUI, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they didn't have a warrant. They couldn't get a warrant either. So there really was no probable cause or cause at all to get this blood draw. You would need consent of the patient. The patient was not available to give consent. And what I would like to call for, if I could call for something, I don't think I can, but if I called for something, I would call for the good officers to stand up more and more and more. I know that they're going to have to try to do it in an appropriate way, that they can't just make a big fuss every time they see a tiny violation. But there was something about the thin blue line, about the blue shield, and corrupt officers would beget more corrupt officers because the non-corrupt officers would not speak up because they felt that they were risking their careers. So that's what I'm worried about, is that we could get to any kind of point where it's okay to allow a little bit of corruption, and because I think that's going to beget a lot of corruption. So really, we need to treat each other equally. We need to treat each other fairly under the law, and the police should really go back to a protect and serve mentality. I honestly believe they should have some kind of legal duty to serve the public, and that if what they're doing is not in furtherance of serving the public, then they would not be allowed to be conducting whatever activities they're conducting. But that's a different conversation. Why did the second officer not stop the assault? I'm curious as well. He's probably going to say that he was a junior officer and he was deferring to his senior officer. That will also be part of what I hope is an upcoming investigation. Could the nurse sue the police officer, the station, or the other people? Yes. The nurse should, in my humble opinion, the nurse should sue the officer and the department and let the chips fall where they may. There should be no question whatsoever that this was an unlawful and damaging act, frankly, to everybody. There are going to be people now that are afraid of going to hospitals because they don't want police to be fighting.
Sorry. I was just trying to charge my phone.
Because they don't want police to be, able to access things if they don't if they're unconscious or don't give permission. For the record, there is a case, Birchfield versus North Carolina was a recent case in 2015. The Supreme Court of the United States said that if you are pulled over for DUI and the police can ask for a breathalyzer, but the police cannot ask for a blood, they can ask. The police can demand that you give a breath sample for measurement for blood alcohol level, but they cannot demand that you give a blood sample and face criminal consequences. That does not mean that you can't lose your license for failing to give blood, but you can not face additional criminal charges or punishments. Tactical, thank you for the $5. If you want videos to make you proud of police, watch some of the sovereign citizen stuff. Epic amounts of patience, professionalism, and not laughing. I agree. There are lots of police officers that face not just sovereign citizens, but citizens who are difficult and disrespectful, and they face them down and give them the appropriate ticket or whatever and wish them a good day. However, I know that men in general are supposed to be tough. I know that police are supposed to be tough. But you know what? When you hear that from people every day, when you hear that kind of disrespect and stuff every day, and I'm not talking about just officers, retail workers, workers on the telephone, people who deal with the general public in a pseudo-anonymous fashion, there are a lot of real shitheads out there, and they make it a real kind of crappy place to live sometimes. And you gotta not let that get to you, right? But what's that? You gotta develop your own coping skills. You have to put in your time and energy to develop coping skills and mental health and all that to deal with the shitheads out there who can't take the time to treat people like people that they don't even know. So yes. I am super enthusiastic about officers who have to put up with that shit and stay professional and courteous and respectful. And that is the vast majority of officers. I don't want anyone watching my stream here to get the idea that I hate on police or anything like that. I absolutely respect the police that do their jobs properly. But at the same time, I think we should definitely take every step we can to eliminate bad behavior from officers that don't respect the badge. To what extent can you use force against a police officer who is doing an unlawful arrest? You can use reasonable force against a police officer that is conducting an unlawful arrest. You are not guilty of assault if you I'll put it this way. You're not guilty of resisting arrest if the arrest is unlawful. However, let me give you a practical piece of advice. If you resist arrest, you can expect you're going to be hurt. You can expect that the officer will use more force than you think is necessary. You can expect that the officer will claim that he felt he was in danger of his life or limb or something. You can expect that other officers will come to his or her aid, not yours. So if you are going to resist arrest, you'd better do it only in the best circumstances where you are 1,000% sure you are being arrested unlawfully, and you are 1,000% sure you're not going to get killed or tased or injured worse than you would be. So my advice as an attorney, and this is real legal advice that you can take to the bank, is if you are being arrested, go with it. Don't fight the officer who is arresting you. You can beat the time, but you can't beat the ride. No one can beat the ride. You can beat the time with a proper defense attorney and a proper defense. And my advice doesn't go any further. I can't tell you how to have the proper defense in 30 seconds. But I can tell you that if your officer says you're under arrest, don't fight them anymore. Go with it. It only looks good for you to be respectful. When a defense attorney, when anybody, when I can say to a jury, my client, look how respectful and patient and kind my client was despite being mistreated, despite being mishandled, despite being unlawfully arrested, then you have a good chance of that jury believing you of that jury siding that you're not guilty, and probably a good chance of some future judge or jury giving you some kind of award for your unlawful arrest, because that is some kind of detention by the government, and that is a violation of several of your constitutional rights. Never say a word to an arresting officer until you have a lawyer, not a word. I do recommend that, however, that is not absolute advice. I'm also not recommending that you do speak to the officer. You have to know what you can and can't say to the officer, and that's a very difficult decision. So your lawyer would rather that you do not speak to the police until you've spoken to the lawyer first. The double-edged sword of that is that sometimes the officer will not give you breaks or settlements or opportunities for deals if you don't cooperate with them in the way they like. So in that sense, when that happens, you're hoping instead to deal with a district attorney, which may be a little bit more forgiving than the officer would have been if you didn't cooperate with the officer. But you do cooperate with the district attorney after speaking to your attorney. I'll give you an example of how this plays out recently. A client of mine had a criminal charge, a very, very minor summary criminal charge. It was almost nothing to worry about. And so we decided to go to court and fight it. And the officer seemed to be more pissed off than anything, and so wasn't offering her any deals. The moment that we appealed it, though, the DA has all sorts of deals on the table because the DA doesn't want to deal with this BS case. It doesn't really matter. So the person still has to pay money to an attorney and a DA and go, probably pay a fine to the government and all that. But the charges will most likely be dropped or dismissed by agreement. And the only trouble there is that this person might have been able to talk to the police officer and talk their way out of the situation instead of lawyering up. But that seems to me to be a violation of your right to an attorney. A person should be able to get an attorney, have a consultation before they talk to officers. But the deal was off the table when we finally talked to officers because she had lawyered up. So that's terrible. You shouldn't take deals off the table just because someone wants to check on their rights. So we're actually running a few minutes late here, so I can hang out for a few more minutes. The officer will try to get you to endem yourself subconsciously. Well, yes. The word would be to incriminate yourself. The officer will ask you they do it cleverly too. Do you know how fast you were going? Well, what's the answer to that question? Either you did know how fast you were going, which means you knew you were guilty of speeding, or you didn't know how fast you were going, which means you're guilty of not knowing how fast you're going. So that could be careless driving. So either way you answer that question, you either say, yeah, I'm always going 75 and a 55, and now the officer's got you on body camera, on audio, saying, you're guilty. Now all he has to do is show up to court and got to get his ticket. He doesn't even have to really testify. So that's not a thing. But then if you say, no, officer, I don't know how fast I was going, then he's got careless driving on you or something because you weren't paying attention to your speed. So that's what we mean when we say don't talk to officers, because they do things. Oh, another one. Here's another one. Do you mind if I search your vehicle? He's not actually giving you an order, but many people will say, yes, you can go ahead and search my vehicle. And anyway, what's the answer to a do you mind question? So many people answer the opposite accidentally. Do you mind if I search your vehicle? Yes. Well, does yes you do mind or yes you don't mind? So you've got to be careful how you answer those questions. Do you mind if I search your vehicle? Officer, I do not consent to any unwarranted searches. Officer, I respect your job and what you got to go through. I don't mean to be I'm not going to be any sort of difficult, but I don't consent to any unwarranted searches. Something like that. And that's only my personal one. Your mileage may vary. That's not a guarantee that anything that I say is going to get you out of a ticket. Yes, I know how fast I was going. Yeah, that's a fine answer, but you also don't have to answer his questions. You can still be respectful while not answering the questions. They are doing a dance. They know they are doing a dance. Oh, what was her answer to the will call thing?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So, and how far out are we?
We're in traffic for the entrance.
Yeah, I figured that.
Probably like another 5 minutes.
Okay.
At least. Yeah.
Cool. I got 5 minutes.
I mean, it's going to take us time to park and stuff, so if you want to talk until we...
No, I don't mind the search, but the heroin in the trunk isn't mine. Yes, you have a Fifth Amendment right in the U.S. not to answer questions that could incriminate you. If you have been subpoenaed as a witness in a case, you may be required to answer questions that don't incriminate you, and you may be allowed to ask questions that do incriminate you, but you are also allowed to deny questions that could incriminate you. In a civil case, however, if you refuse to answer questions that could incriminate you, for instance, copyright is a crime as well as a civil offense, so you might think, I'll just say Fifth Amendment when asked questions about my copyright infringement, then that's not a valid defense. The judge might actually make an adverse inference as to that fact and may say, yes, you did commit some kind of copyright infringement. Can police cherry pick your answers in court? Sort of, but you have the right to cross-examination. You can cross-examine them, and your lawyer can directly examine you. I am headed to the Maryland Ren Fair. So, Ren Fair buddy in Pittsburgh, I hope you have a great time at yours. I'm going to the Maryland Ren Fair. Mike, my driver here, my friend, is my friend from 25 years ago. We were in the same choir together, the Singing Boys of Pennsylvania, and that's all I'm going to say about that. Yes, the Annapolis one, I think someone was saying that they wanted to meet up with us. That sounded cool. I would love to do that. I am not a criminal defense attorney. That is correct. I occasionally appear in court to represent somebody. I do have one criminal defense case coming up, but I take them very few and far between, only when I feel they're very worthwhile. Brandon says hello. Brandon's my assistant. Declan apologizes. I have no idea for what. Livestream. I heard the victim was in critical condition and taking blood would put the person's life at risk. That's also a reason. If that's the case, then that's also a reason why she would refuse. The Pennsylvania Ren Fair is good too. Yes, I have been to the Pennsylvania Ren Fair and I did enjoy it. I have not been to the Maryland one, and I just, really felt like taking a 3-hour car ride this morning. Yes, Aussies go to sleep. It's probably past midnight for you. What about Alex Maurer? Any quick updates on Alex Maurer? No, probably tomorrow. Tomorrow's the 21-day period of time that I wanna file something tomorrow, because she has till September 25th, and that's 21 days from tomorrow. Yep, 20 past midnight. That's what I thought, you Aussies. What's a Ren Fair? It's a Renaissance fair. It's like a role-playing game. The whole place is like a amusement park, but all dressed up in the theme of the European Renaissance, including the buildings, the people, the food,
Ish.
sort of ish. Yeah, I don't think people would actually want to eat.
No.
Yeah. There will be fake swords. There will be minstrels. There will be scantily clad women, I hope, at some point.
Hopefully.
Yeah, if you're into that sort of thing, hopefully there are some brutish men as well. But they're all dressed up and they all act and play, and they dance and sing too, and that's what we're going to see, is some dancing if we get there in 10 minutes. And it's a fun time. It's as much fun for the actors as well, because they get to put on this clothing and act and play and dance and sing and really interact, and Renaissance was a little bit more crass and crude, so they get to be a little crass and crude and make some off-color jokes as well. And so I really like the Ren Fair. It's pretty cool. Last one I went to, I got to don a rubber suit of armor, and they attached balloons to us, and we fought each other with swords.
Neat.
And we popped each other's balloons.
Yeah, they have knife throwing and axe throwing.
Yeah, knife throwing and axe
archery.
Throwing. Although I do kind of do that stuff at home already.
Yeah, archery. Yeah, but you can get like a sticker or something.
Yeah, it's okay. I can spend $5 to throw an axe. So we'll see. Yeah, I'll be home in a little bit. So we're just about here now. So if there are any last minute anythings, I know someone mentioned Brilliant Earth. That's on the list. There could be more to that than it seems. I'm not sure. There were some pretty clear accusations there. It sounded like the Brilliant Earth attacker guy, I forget who he was from, was really going after them, and it sounds like they were really trying to defend. So someone's going to be right and someone's going to be wrong. No, I think Brilliant Earth sued him. I don't think he's getting a choice in the matter. I think Brilliant Earth is coming after him. So, Chris Hadfield? No. Colonel Chris Hadfield? No, I hope not. Hope it's a different person. Can I recap what I think of the nurse arrest? I think the nurse was arrested unlawfully. I think she was not obstructing justice. I think in order for her to be obstructing justice... Sorry, the sun's in my eyes. In order for her to be obstructing justice, the officer would have had probable cause. The driver was not the perpetrator, but the victim of the DUI or whatever accident. And the driver was unconscious and unable to give consent. So without consent, without probable cause, without a warrant, there's no exigent circumstances. That's an unlawful arrest. So it being an unlawful arrest, he is probably guilty of assault, probably guilty of unlawful detention, some kind of other unlawful arrest statute or something like that might exist. I really don't know. Before him, I think.
Oh, okay.
And that's that. I think she has a claim against the department and or the officer, and the officer will either claim that he was not trained properly by the department, or the department will claim that he was trained properly and was instead... You're going straight. Okay. They're calling for you over there. That he was not trained properly, and try to put the blame on the department. So it's going to be I think it's going to be liability on the part of the department and or the officer. But definitely the nurse was not in the wrong. So, very interesting case. We are now here, and it's time to go. So thank you all very much for joining me. I don't have my list of sponsors to read off, but I will post them, or ask Brandon to post them if he can. But... and I will talk to you in my next video, and thank everybody in my next video properly. So thank you all for joining me. We're going to go run to see this show in 8 minutes that we're supposed to be going for. I'm Leonard French, your favorite copyright attorney. Have a great Sunday or great Monday, and great Labor Day weekend, all of you Americans. Love you all. Bye-bye.
Nice.
We're not quite out yet.